Welcome to the Band Director Bootcamp podcast, the go-to place for busy band directors who want practical to build programs while maintaining balance in their lives. This podcast is brought to you by the Empowered Music Educator Academy, where we help directors like you find efficiency, sustainability, and impact in your teaching and leadership. And speaking of impact, our platinum sponsor, Kennelly Keys Music, has been serving musicians with a commitment to quality, reliability, and exceptional service. Whether you need top-tier instruments, expert repairs, or trusted advice, they've got you covered. Now, let's dive in and set the tempo for success.
Welcome to another episode of Band Director Bootcamp, the podcast with productivity and wellness tips for busy band directors. I'm your host, Lesley Moffat, and I'm really grateful to be sharing this platform with you. This podcast is brought to you by people at the Empowered Music Educator Academy, where we help directors like you find efficiency, sustainability, and impact in your teaching and leadership. Speaking of impact, our platinum sponsor, Kennelly Keys Music, has been serving musicians since 1960 with a commitment to quality, reliability, and exceptional service. So whether you need top-tier instruments, expert repairs, or trusted advice, they've got you covered. So let's dive in and start talking about today's topic. It could get a little heavy, but we got some stuff to talk about today, and it's a really important topic. And I'm really grateful that we have a guest here today, Megan Farison, who is going to be really open with us and talk about some things that we all need to talk about and think about, and why it's so important to us. And Megan and I are looking at doing this through, of course, that lens of productivity and wellness, and our own personal wellness today is what we're talking about. So, and around establishing a classroom culture of safety and well-being. So, I'm really excited. So, Megan, first of all, thanks for showing up today.
Thank you so much for having me on your show. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Hey, Megan's been, she's a voice person, you guys too, but we'll let her do this thing. She's teaching for nearly 20 years. And in 2019, there was a traumatic event that actually led her to write her memoir, which is called Dissonance, and was published last November, I believe. Is that correct, Megan? Congratulations on that. I'm sorry for the reason, but that what it takes to go through and to share your story, I know what that's like. So kudos to you for doing that. Megan's also founded Sing, Coach, and Conduct, a podcast for musicians and music educators, and Give Her the Pen, which is a coaching business that helps women process and share their stories through writing and memoir. And the reason she's here today is because we're going to talk about some strategies to establish a classroom culture that prioritizes safety and well-being. We're always talking about that for students, but we're going to talk about it for you. Okay, that's important. We're going to discuss some practical tips to set healthy boundaries and create a supportive environment, and how these practices can enhance both your personal and professional lives. So in the next 18 minutes, we're going to tell you all the things, people. We're going to dive in deep, and we're going to dive in fast. So just let me jump in, Megan, and ask you to maybe give us a little bit of your background and tell us what you consider to be a culture of safety in the classroom, and why it's significant for students, but also educators.
So one thing I did want to mention is I really do appreciate you letting me on the show, because I went over to the dark side and became a choir director, but I was going to be a band director originally. And one of the greatest compliments that I have received is when someone watches me work with a group and they say to me, "You have a background in band, don't you?" So I just wanted to throw that out there. As far as what we're talking about here, talking about a culture of safety and well-being in the classroom, I think that when we're educators, we have to remember that we are so much more to students than these vessels of knowledge where we're just imparting information and knowledge to students. We are very much role models in their life. And we develop a lot of very close relationships with many of our students. And so in many ways, we sort of set the scene for what relationships may look like for them moving forward with adults in authority. And so when we're discussing a culture of classroom safety and well-being, we're not talking about just physical safety here. We're talking about something that is much more, I would say, important on a day-to-day basis in a lot of classrooms, not all. Some schools are dealing with physical safety issues every day, but in a lot of cases, every day we're dealing with mental and emotional safety with students. Are we approaching our relationships in a way that are helping our students to develop healthy boundaries, to feel safe and happy in our classroom? Or are we doing things that threaten their safety emotionally, mentally, which can lead to both acute trauma and long-term? So it's important what we do every single day in our classroom, and who we are is much more important than even what we teach our students.
Yeah. All educators have to be careful, but can you talk about some of the things that are unique to music educators and why there's like a whole nother layer of extra scenarios and the kinds of situations we're in that can be red flags or cautionary things for us to really be mindful of?
So because, if you follow the things that I follow, which is speaking of educator sexual misconduct in these situations where there's allegations against teachers, you'll find that a lot of these teachers are in the arts, performing arts, theater, sometimes English too, because in these particular subjects, we are diving into matters of the soul, matters of the heart. Right? When we're talking about music, many people love music because it touches us on this deep level. And so the things that you're exploring in a music class are different than what you explore in a math class. And so these opportunities occur in music or theater that wouldn't occur in other classrooms, like talking about, okay, let's dig into what does this piece of music mean to you? And what do you feel about it? I mean, you're really digging into a person's psyche in a lot of ways. And so as you do that, you want to make sure you do that in a responsible way. So that's just, first up is just the subject we deal with, right? And the fact that music can be so touchy-feely and we can be talking about those things. But then in addition to that, performing arts teachers tend to spend more time with their students because we do things outside of the classroom. So we go to festivals, we go on trips, and especially when we're talking about overnight trips, we take our kids to places like Chicago, New York, somewhere in the country, and we're spending quite a bit of time with them, and they're in our care, in our personal care during that time. So there's just so many opportunities to be with your students in a capacity that other teachers are not. And so you have to have a heightened awareness, I think, even of how you are interacting and making sure that you are keeping yourself safe and keeping your students safe.
Yeah. So right along that line, you just started to tap into it, which talked earlier about 5 tips you have for establishing a class of culture and safety and well-being. So those are pretty concrete. And if you want to address those, I think it would be really helpful because I think all of us can picture a lot of these situations you're talking about. And as you go through these 5 tips, people can start to see how, I could apply this in my scenario and the like. So go ahead and tell us about those.
So tip number 1 is pretty standard fare for most educators. I think we know this, is that we have to establish clear expectations for our classroom. So we have to make sure that when students come into our room, they know exactly what to expect. They know what the structure of our classroom is like. They know what our routines are, what is expected of students, what is expected of the teacher. Because I think adults can even relate to this in going into other places, maybe even going to work, right? A teacher going into work, that when you don't know what to expect in the day-to-day, you do not feel safe. If you're not sure what's going to happen, is my administrator going to be angry at me today? Am I going to have a letter in my mailbox? You do not feel safe. And so the same thing we need to be giving our students is that when they walk into our room every day, they know exactly what to expect. And we are human beings, and we're not robots. So we're going to have fluctuations in the way we feel from day to day. But we definitely don't want our students coming in and wondering, well, today is Miss Moffat going to be in a really bad mood, or is she going to be, funny today, or is she going to be kind? And so that's just sort of standard, I would say. But I think the thing that a lot of teachers miss is this second step, which is that not only you need to establish the clear expectations for routine and structure, but you have to also establish a system of accountability, a clear system, which means that when a routine, a boundary, a rule is violated, what happens then? And if we do not take the time to establish that ahead of time, what ends up happening is in the moment, we're having to think in the moment of what to do. And that takes a lot of mental and emotional energy. And depending on the situation, that can get pretty intense, depending on what you're dealing with. And so, I was thinking about the story that you told, Lesley, when you were with Joey about the kids you saw with the bag and the gun. That really has stayed with me, right? And it wasn't a real gun. You had no rule book for that. Like, there's no book to tell you how to deal with that. And that's outside of the box. However, though, the more you prepare for and you say, hey, if this happens, this is what's going to happen. This is what I'm going to do to respond. And the more transparent you are with your students about that, it really removes a lot of that stress of, oh, no, if this happens, now what do I do? And I have to figure it out in the moment. And then when you do that, you can make mistakes and handle things in an emotional way that you'll later regret. And it can cause not only conflict, but it can cause potential trauma to the student if you react in a certain way, because you matter to them and what happens to them matters to them. So that is number two. So far, am I doing all right? Am I being pretty clear?
I'm absolutely following what you're saying. And I'm envisioning, what are the things in my classroom, the routines that help kids anchor. I'm thinking through all these things as you're talking about them. And I hope other people or I'm sure they are too.
Awesome. Okay, so number 3 would be to maintain transparency and boundaries. So basically with this one, you want to be very clear about what you will and will not accept from students and yourself. So it goes both ways. This goes back to being a role model, is that if you want to have a classroom that has kind and respectful people in it, right? Where you walk into a room and you get that positive vibe and you're like, yeah, this is a place I want to be. Typically, that room feels that way because the educator is that way, because they give off that positive vibe, because they are respectful. And so just at a very basic level, making sure as the role model, you are setting the example for how you want your students to treat each other. But then the other piece of that is that you want to be very clear with your students about, what is okay and what is not okay when you're dealing with your relationship with them. So a couple examples of this are, and this goes back to taking your students on trips, is that you don't tend to have the phone number of your math teacher, probably, but hopefully not. But when you're going to on a trip, oftentimes the choir director, band director, orchestra director will give out their phone number for safety reasons. They'll say, hey, I'm going to give everybody on this bus my cell phone number. Take your cell phones out if something happens, and here's the chain, and here's how we do this. And you just do that as a way to be safe. But then you also want to say, and be very transparent again, and say, but do not use my cell phone for any reason that isn't an emergency. And you say this in front of all the students, because in your classroom, there should be no secrets. There should be nothing that you're doing behind the scenes that the students are not aware of, that your administrators are not aware of, or your parents. Everything has to be very transparent. So that would be one instance. I have a quick story about this, and it's actually about my husband, who's a choir director, also was going to be a band director and ended up being a choir director. And I had ran into some of his students at a coffee shop. It was a group of girls, and they were really excited to see me. They're like, "Oh, Mrs. Farison, so good to see you." And they were going, one of them said to the other one, "Hey, I'm going to text Mr. Farison and let him know we saw his wife." And the other one stopped her and said, "Remember, we do not use Mr. Farison's cell phone unless it's an emergency." And I went home and told my husband that this had happened, and he said it was one of the best compliments he thought he could receive as a teacher, was to know that his students were actually managing each other in that space. Like they were saying, "Hey, remember, this is how we behave, and these are the boundaries that we have with Mr. Farison and his family." So that would be that transparency and boundaries. So number 4 is respecting personal space. So I am one of those teachers that I would never tell you can never hug a student. I have hugged a student on many occasions, but it comes down to intention and is it reasonable? And it's got to come back to transparency again, is that when I have hugged a student, in my memory, it's always like a celebratory moment, right? Like we just finished a concert and a kid comes up with their parents and they give you a hug and they want a picture with you and everything is out in front of everyone. And as far as, hugging a student because they were sad, I think that's even a different situation that you want to be very careful of, where you can be there for them and you can help them through something without touching them, without the only memory I have actually of hugging a student because they were sad was actually 2 students had their arms around me and were hugging me because a student that day had just attempted suicide in one of my back rooms, my practice rooms. And so my students were holding me in their arms, and that again, does it make it the intention and is it reasonable? And I would say in that case, it was very reasonable for us to be holding each other in that case. So you do not want to have an environment where your students feel like they can get into your bubble anytime they want. There should be no, I'm putting my head on my teacher's shoulder or giving my teacher a back rub or a head rub. And these things do happen in schools or reverse. So there's that as well, right? Which may seem obvious to a lot of people, but so number 5, ensure observability in one-on-one interactions. So you have to make sure that anytime you're alone with a student, it is easily observable and easily interruptible. So it does not make sense to say to a teacher, you're never going to be alone with a student. You can set that as a general boundary, but at some point that may happen, and you just have to make sure that when that happens, that someone can come in at any time and that it would be okay for them to walk into that room and to see what's going on. So those are the 5 tips that I have.
Those are really helpful, very concrete. And your stories really help make those understandable too. Before I ask you a little bit on our final few questions, I just want to take a minute and do a big shout out to our sponsors, the Empowered Music Educator Academy and Kennelly Keys Music.
As band directors, we know that success is all about preparation, whether it's in the classroom, on the podium, or behind the scenes. That's why the Empowered Music Educator Academy is here to help you master time management, reduce stress, and create sustainable routines that keep both you and your program thriving. And when it comes to ensuring your musicians have access to top quality instruments and services, Kennelly Keys Music is the name to trust. From rentals and repairs to expert advice and outstanding customer service, Kennelly Keys is committed to keeping your program running smoothly. Visit KennellyKeysMusic.com today to explore their offerings and experience the difference of working with a company that truly cares about music education. Now, back to the show.
All right, we are back wrapping things up here with Megan Farison, who's been sharing a lot of things with us. And before I let you go, Megan, I would like to ask you to just give us a little brief synopsis of your memoir, maybe why you wrote it. And then Megan has very generously offered a free sneak peek to all the listeners. We're going to put a link to how you can get your hands on that. But tell us a little bit about that so listeners can understand your passion.
Thank you so much for allowing me to share. So in April of 2019, I found out that my high school band director had been arrested in Florida for child sexual abuse and pornography. And I live in Michigan, and he had taught in Michigan for 20 years before moving to Florida and working there for 6 years before he was arrested. And this really blew my whole world up. I hadn't even thought about this man in a decade. And when the day I found out, I suffered a traumatic episode that really changed the course of my life. And the reason that this was so impactful was that this man had groomed me when I was young. I met him when I was on the cusp of my 14th birthday. And so he groomed me for 2 years and then began a sexual relationship with me that lasted for 6 years. And so this was a secret relationship, and I did not understand that it was abuse. In fact, I never understood it was abuse until he was arrested. And then even when he was arrested, I could not understand that it was abuse because he had so successfully groomed me. And when I say groomed, I mean that he had prepared me or trained me for a specific purpose, which was for him, which was whatever he wanted from me. And when we're young, going back to the crux of this episode and why we set boundaries and why we're a role model for our students, is that whether you teach at elementary, middle school, high school, college level, there is a power imbalance between you and these students. And what you do, the way you act toward them, the way you interact with them affects them. And it really can affect their relationships moving forward, what they expect. So the book is basically, it alternates in its timeline. So it's a dual timeline memoir. So you see what's happening in the present, which is finding out about the arrest, and then you go back and forth between the past and present to see how they affect each other. And this was the reason I wrote it, was I needed to, because my life was in a very, it was not in a good place, and I knew I needed to write the book or my life was potentially going to completely fall apart. So I had to put those pieces together, and the book was the way that I did that.
I know firsthand how healing that process can be, and having to do it, and how, it's a lot. And so I want to thank you today for being so vulnerable, telling your story and sharing your insights, so that we can all, just put pause out and just make sure you put a pause on things when we're thinking about what we're doing, and being extra aware these days. Because like you said, an allegation can be, even if nothing's there. So we just got to be extra careful. If anybody wants to get in touch with you, how could they find you to find out more about like your coaching services or your podcast?
So I'm the host of Sing, Coach, Conduct. And so even though the word sing is in it, band directors, choir directors, orchestra directors can all go to it and get something out of it. I've interviewed international musicians and music educators. And I love what you do, Lesley, because I feel like all these different podcasts have a different flavor and a different sort of approach. And so I really, really love what you're doing on yours. And so I would invite people, if they want to come over and listen to a few episodes on mine, they can find a variety of different people over there. I do have a website, meganfarison.com, and you can send me a message through that if you're interested in a coaching session, if you're interested in me working with your students, because I do clinics. And as far as Give Her the Pen, we do have a website for that, giveherthepen.com. You can really just go exploring. You can go down a little rabbit hole and you can find out all about me and the things I do. And above all, I just want to be somebody that's here to help people in whatever capacity I'm able to help them.
Well, we all have to sit and watch those annual trainings that can be like, on about this topic. And I think you've brought it into the light in a better way for us and reminded all of us of our responsibilities and vulnerabilities and and how we can protect everybody. So thank you again for your time and your insight. And all you listeners, please be sure to check out the show notes to link to all those amazing resources that Megan has generously offered for us. And don't forget to subscribe and leave a review if you found this discussion helpful. That's a wrap on this episode of Band Director Bootcamp. Remember, success in music education isn't just about what happens on the podium. It's about taking care of yourself and setting up systems that work for you. The Empowered Music Educator Academy is here to help you do just that. So be sure to check out our resources at empowerededucator.com. And of course, a huge thank you to Kennelly Keys Music, our platinum sponsor, for their unwavering support of music educators like you. Whether you need instruments, accessories, or expert advice, their team's ready to help. Thanks to all you listeners out there. Keep making a difference in kids' lives through the magic of music education.
That's a wrap on this episode of the Band Director Bootcamp podcast. Remember, success in music education isn't just about what happens on the podium. It's about taking care of yourself and setting up systems that work for you. The Empowered Music Educator Academy is here to help you do just that. So be sure to check out our resources at empowerededucator.com. And of course, a huge thank you to Kennelly Keys Music, our platinum sponsor, for their unwavering support of music educators like you. Whether you need instruments, accessories, or expert advice, their team is ready to help. Thanks for listening and keep making music happen.